Welcome to True Echo, where real struggles meet shocking turnarounds. Today's story is about assumptions, identity, and a moment that changed everything. What happens when a black doctor walks into a hospital and they hand him a mop instead of a scalpel? Stay with us, you won't believe how it ends. My name is Dr. Leonard Briggs. I'm 38 years old, a trauma surgeon, and this is the story of how on my very first day back in the city where I grew up, they handed me a mop instead of a scalpel. It was just after 6 a.m. when I walked into St. Anne's Medical Center in Tempe, Arizona, my old stomping ground. I had grown up not far from here. As a kid, I used to ride past this very hospital, looking up at the glass windows of the operating wing and whispering, "One day that's going to be me." And now here I was. Surgical scrubs, a duffel bag over my shoulder, fresh off a transfer from a prestigious hospital in Philadelphia. No badge yet, the printer system was down, they said. But I figured my presence, my confidence, my bearing would speak for itself. Apparently not. "Hey, there's a spill near the vending machines. Can you take care of that real quick?" The nurse didn't even glance up from her clipboard. I blinked. Thought she was joking. Before I could respond, another voice snapped from behind me. "Don't argue. The floor's a mess and visitors are coming soon." A woman in a maroon blazer, hair tight in a bun. The nameplate read, "Deborah Collins, Director of Operations." She shoved a mop at me like it was a baton in some twisted relay. I opened my mouth to speak. "You're not here to debate," she snapped. "Clean the floor. Then maybe we'll talk about raises." My fingers tightened around the mop handle. I wasn't angry. Not at first. Just stunned. Not because it happened, but because it always happens. So, I said it plainly, "I'm Dr. Briggs, the new trauma surgeon. I'm on for rounds with Dr. Mathis at 7. Silence. And then, code blue trauma or 3. Dr. Briggs 2 or 3 immediately. The same nurse who handed me the mop dropped her clipboard. Collins just blinked. I dropped the mop gently against the wall and walked past them. Through those double doors, I disappeared into the chaos they never imagined I could control. I didn't look back as the doors swung shut behind me. If I had, I might have seen their jaws still hanging open, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. Inside, the OR was already a blur of movement and urgency. A nurse snapped a surgical mask over my face before I could reach for one myself. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't hesitate. She just moved because someone's life depended on it. 32-year-old male, she rattled off. Rollover accident. No seatbelt. Blunt force trauma to chest and abdomen. BP's dropping, 70/30. Pupils reactive but sluggish. We're prepping for laparotomy. Is Dr. Mathis here? I asked, tying the back of my gown. Stuck in another OR, she said quickly. You're it. I didn't flinch. By the time she finished that sentence, I was already scrubbing in. Inside the room, it was like stepping into another universe. The air was thick, sterile, tense, electric. Blood stained the sheets. Tubes, monitors, beeps. A ventilator hissed rhythmically. 2 nurses were adjusting lines. An anesthesiologist was counting out meds in a low, urgent voice. A young resident stood in the corner, wide-eyed, frozen, probably wondering who the hell I was. I stepped up. "Let's open him up." The resident hesitated. "I'm Dr. Briggs. Trauma surgery," I said without breaking stride. "Scalpel." The nurse didn't question. She handed it over. From outside the observation glass, I caught sight of Collins and the nurse who'd handed me the mop. They hadn't moved from where I left them. Now they just watched. The first incision was clean, precise. The kind that tells a room everything it needs to know. I didn't have to prove myself. Not with words. This was my arena, and here my hands spoke for me. Clamp. Suction. Retractor. We found the source of the bleeding, liver laceration, pretty bad. I called for a hepatic. The room shifted into harmony. Everyone moved like gears in a watch, synced by my voice. That's where I thrived, right there in that knife-edge space between panic and control. Nobody asked me about janitorial duties anymore. Outside the glass, Collins crossed her arms tight. The nurse next to her just stared, silent. Something flickered in their eyes, something new. Respect? Maybe. But it didn't erase what had happened. After what felt like both an hour and a heartbeat, the vitals started to climb. Bleeding, contained. BP stabilized. "Let's close him up," I said. There was a long pause when I stepped back from the table. The team looked at me like they had just seen something bigger than a safe. And maybe they had. I peeled off my gloves slowly. "Call ICU. We've got a fighter coming up." The nurses nodded. As I stepped away, a young scrub tech came up behind me. She looked hesitant, her voice small. Dr. Briggs, I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't know. I nodded once. It's fine. But it wasn't. And it shouldn't have had to be. Because what if there hadn't been a code blue? What if I had just taken that mop and cleaned the floor? What would they have thought then? That I belonged there. That's what. The scrub room was cold. Stainless steel gleamed under harsh fluorescent light, but it didn't feel clean. Not in the way I needed. My hands were raw from scrubbing, my collar damp with sweat, and my heart, it was steady. Too steady. Like it had practiced being numb. I stood alone for a long time before moving. Sometimes after surgery you just need a second. Not to celebrate, not to bask in praise, there's rarely any of that. You just need to breathe because what you did wasn't magic. It was blood, tissue, reflexes, training. But mostly it was trust, your own and everyone else's. I heard the door creak behind me. Didn't turn right away. Dr. Briggs? It was the nurse. The same one from the hallway. Her voice was small now. Can I talk to you for a second? I nodded without facing her. Stared at my reflection in the brushed metal panel above the sink. I didn't know who you were, she said quickly. I shouldn't have assumed. I turned slowly. Looked her straight in the eyes. It's not about the mop, I said. She blinked. It's about the fact that you didn't even ask. You looked at me and decided who I was. Based on nothing but my face, my skin, and a duffel bag. Her eyes dropped to the floor. I was tired, she mumbled. Night shift, long hours. So was I cut in. But I showed up ready to save lives. Because someone's son was dying. Someone's father. You think he cared how tired I was? She didn't have an answer. Just nodded quietly and stepped out of the room. I didn't feel better. I felt heavy. Vindication doesn't weigh any less than humiliation. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the break room pot. That's when Deborah Collins walked in. Her smugness from earlier was gone. In its place was something practiced. Controlled. Like a politician mid-spin. Dr. Briggs, she said, testing the words like they were foreign. I didn't respond. I wanted to apologize. What happened earlier was inappropriate. I sipped my coffee. It was lukewarm and bitter, but I drank it anyway. You thought I was the janitor, I said flatly. You weren't wearing a badge. You came in through the staff entrance. So did everyone else, I interrupted. She swallowed hard. It was an error in judgment. I let the silence hang there. Heavy. Like anesthesia just before it kicks in. We're holding a seminar next week, she continued, hospital-wide, focused on bias in healthcare. I think your perspective would be incredibly valuable. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to stand in front of a room and talk about how you humiliated me on my first day? I think it would mean something coming from you. People listen when someone with experience speaks. I laughed sharp cold. They only listen when someone almost dies. She didn't reply. I'll think about it, I said. And just like that she was gone. A flicker in the doorway, a PR move dressed as an olive branch. Later that evening I stopped by the ICU. Room 412. Kyle Hensley. 32 years old. Construction foreman. No seatbelt. One too many drinks. He had flipped his truck off Loop 202. I only knew about his daughter because she was curled in a waiting room chair earlier, holding a giant stuffed rabbit and whispering to her grandmother that she missed Daddy's laugh. He was stable now. Sedated, tubes in his mouth, machines quietly beeping, his chest rising and falling like a tide that almost gave up. Nobody ever sees this part. They remember the panic, the sirens, the blood. Not the stillness after. Not the quiet victories. I adjusted his 4 and jotted a note on the chart. Then I stepped out. I needed air, something to shake off the weight. But I didn't walk outside. I walked back to the OR. The lights were low now. Just steel tables and that sharp scent of antiseptic. A janitor was mopping in the corner, earbuds in, head bobbing slightly to some unheard beat. He didn't even glance at me as I walked past the same spot I had dropped the mop that morning. I sat on the edge of the operating table. This was where it had all shifted. Not when I saved a life. But when they realized I could. That's what it takes, sometimes, not a degree, not dedication. Just a body on the table and the right hands to open it up. The irony? The same hands they gave a mop to, turned out to be the only ones that could stop someone from dying. I stayed in that or longer than I should have. Just sitting. Not as a doctor, not even as a man who just saved someone's life, but as someone trying to understand how a lifetime of effort could still be erased in a single glance. A voice pulled me back. You're a good surgeon. I looked up. The resident. The same one who froze earlier. He looked less shaky now but still carried that uncertainty young doctors wear like a second coat. I gave a faint smile. I know. He chuckled, nervous. I mean, yeah, obviously. But I've never seen someone take control like that. You weren't even flustered. That's because I've done it before. He leaned against the counter, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking to the spot where Kyle had nearly bled out. Is it always like that? He asked. The pressure? You mean the surgery? I asked. Or being mistaken for something I'm not? He looked down at his shoes. Didn't answer. Don't beat yourself up, I said. Just remember what it felt like watching me work. Next time you see someone who doesn't look the part, maybe think twice before assuming they don't belong. He nodded slowly. I will. I stood and stretched. My back cracked softly. I looked around the room one last time like I was sealing it in memory. Go get some sleep, I said. He left. But I didn't. That room, cold, empty, was filled with echoes that clung to me. Not just from the surgery but from earlier. From the silence that screamed louder than words when I was handed that mop. When no one stopped it. When everyone looked away. By Friday the story had spread. Hospitals have a way of turning whispers into legends. Everyone had heard some version of what happened that morning. Some people tried subtle gestures, nodding in the hallway, awkward half-smiles, but most avoided saying anything outright. Except Rosa. Head nurse on trauma. Puerto Rican. Late 40s. Chewed cinnamon gum like it was her nemesis. She stopped me at the elevator. You made quite an impression this week, she said, handing me a patient chart. I smirked. So I've heard. She looked me up and down. Handled it better than I would've. What's the alternative? I asked. Throw the mop? Flip a desk. She grinned. Tempting. I thought about it, I said, chuckling. Her expression softened. We've all been there, she said. Some more than others. There was a beat of silence. You going to do that seminar? She asked. I leaned against the wall. Sighed. I don't know. Feels like a trap. She raised an eyebrow. How? It's always the same, I said. They want the speech. The applause. The thank you for your courage moment. Then they go back to doing the same thing. Maybe, she said, but maybe someone hears you this time. Maybe a resident thinks twice next time he sizes someone up. I didn't answer. Just stared at the floor. She stepped a little closer. When I started here, she said, patients used to ask if I was legal. Right in front of my boss. In front of doctors. I smiled every time. Until I didn't. I looked at her. I stopped smiling when it stopped helping, she said. But I didn't stop speaking. I nodded. Slowly. I'll think about it. You should. That afternoon, Collins emailed again. Formal. Polished. PR perfect. We would be honored if Dr. Briggs would consider sharing his experience at our Diversity and Equity Forum next Thursday. His voice is essential. Essential. Interesting word. Apparently, it only became essential after I stopped someone from dying. I didn't reply. Not right away. I needed time. But time in a hospital never waits. And Thursday was coming. Fast. Thursday morning came wrapped in gray skies and fluorescent lights. I stood just outside the conference room, hands buried in the pockets of my coat. Inside, I could hear the soft hum of conversation. Murmurs, coffee cups clinking, name tags rustling against button-down shirts. I'd seen this setup 100 times. Panel tables, bland pastries, corporate apologies disguised as community healing. But this time my name was on the flyer. Keynote speaker, Dr. Leonard Briggs. I never RSVP'd. Never replied to Collins' email. But she put me on the schedule anyway. Because that's what institutions do. They create moments for optics. For reports. For diversity efforts that rarely move beyond the carpeted walls of conference rooms. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Not because I needed to speak, but because someone needed to listen. I pushed the door open. The room fell quiet. Heads turned. Residents, nurses, administrators, even the security guard from Monday. All here. All watching. I walked to the front. Didn't step behind the podium. Just stood beside it, coat still on, eyes steady. And then I said it. Monday morning, I began. Someone handed me a mop and told me to clean up a spill near the vending machines. A few people shifted in their seats. I wasn't wearing a badge. That's true. But no one asked who I was. They didn't need to. They'd already decided. The silence in the room thickened. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I was tired. Tired of how often it happens. Tired of the fact that I knew exactly why it happened and still, I had to go into that or and be perfect. Because that's what it takes to be seen. I let the silence sit. I've spent over a decade in school and training on call. I've missed birthdays, funerals. I lost a marriage because of how much I gave to this job. And even after all that, the first thing people see when I walk in isn't a surgeon. It's someone who doesn't belong. Nobody moved. I'm not here to make you feel guilty. That doesn't help anyone. But I am here to say this. The next time you look at someone and make an assumption based on nothing but skin, clothing, or silence, ask yourself why. My eyes swept the room. And if it's not fair, fix it. That's your responsibility, not mine. Stillness. Then someone clapped. Slowly. Then another. The rhythm grew. Not explosive applause, but real. When it quieted, I stepped away from the front. No smile. No nod. Just a quiet walk back toward the door. Rosa met my eyes from the third row. Gave a single nod. Outside in the hallway, I exhaled. My shift started in 20 minutes. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight alone. The applause from that seminar didn't follow me down the hall. It stayed in that room, boxed in by folding chairs and fruit trays, where safe conversations live and die without consequence. But something else did follow me, eyes. More people started nodding in the hallway. Quiet acknowledgments. Soft mornings from people who hadn't looked at me twice before. A few even muttered, "Hey, Dr. Briggs." That talk really hit home. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't validation I was looking for. It wasn't praise. It was change. But real change doesn't arrive in applause. It shows up in silence, when the next black resident walks in and doesn't get mistaken for transport staff. When the nurse in the break room does speak up when someone makes a snide comment. When people stop laughing at assumptions that never should have been made. Late that night, I found myself back outside room 412. Kyle was still there. Still breathing. Still alive. His daughter's stuffed rabbit was now tucked under his arm. Someone had drawn a purple flower on the dry erase board by the door. "Daddy, you're my hero," it read in a child's handwriting. I stood there for a while, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But in a way, we were linked now, by that hour where everything went wrong and I had to make it right. As I turned to leave, I saw Rosa at the nurse's station. "Hey," she said. "That thing you said, about fixing it? That stuck." I gave her a half smile. "Think anyone really heard it?" "Maybe not everyone," she said, shrugging. "But you lit a match. Now we'll see who carries it." I didn't say anything. Just nodded. Back in the locker room, I changed out of my scrubs. The name stitched across my chest felt heavier than it had Monday. Dr. Leonard Briggs. Same letters. But now they meant something to more people. Still, there was one thing I couldn't shake. All of this, everything that changed, that shifted, only happened because someone nearly died. If Kyle hadn't coded, if I hadn't been called in, if I had just taken that mop, they would have never known who I was. Or worse, they would have thought they already did. And that was the part that haunted me. Because there are people like me walking into rooms every day, quietly carrying excellence buried under assumption. And most of them won't get a code blue to prove themselves. By the following Monday, they finally printed my badge. The woman at HR smiled awkwardly as she handed it over, like the rectangle of laminated plastic could somehow make up for everything else. I clipped it to my coat. It read in bold black letters. Dr. Leonard Briggs, Trauma Surgery. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into place. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like proof. And the fact that I needed proof to be believed said everything. I made my rounds, checked in on Kyle, awake now, groggy but lucid. He recognized me from the blur of the oar. Called me Doc with the calm hands. His daughter ran up and hugged my legs in the ICU hallway. I crouched down to meet her eyes and she whispered, "Thank you for fixing my daddy." I smiled for real then. Not for appearances. Not out of professionalism. But because that was the only kind of recognition that mattered. Later that afternoon, I passed the vending machines, the same ones from that morning. And there it was again, the mop. Propped up against the wall. A new janitor wiping down the tile. He nodded at me as I walked by. I nodded back. No tension. No wait. Just two professionals doing what we're trained to do. A few feet away, I heard someone whisper, "That's him. That's the doctor from last week." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Let them talk. Let them remember. Because stories have a way of sticking when they carry truth. And this story of a doctor mistaken for a janitor, had started to echo beyond that hospital floor. A week after the seminar, Colin sent another email. Subject line, thank you and moving forward. She wrote about the staff feedback, the praise, the meaningful change we're excited to build upon. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I hadn't done any of this for her. But I did send one email, to Rosa. It said, I spoke. Now it's your turn to light a match. She replied, already did. They just handed another nurse a mop. And guess what? A resident stepped in this time. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Maybe that was how change starts. Not with a seminar. Not even with a speech. But with a ripple. A single act of dignity mirrored by someone else. And someone else after that. A week later, I walked past a new med student being introduced to the team. Young. Black. Nervous. Wearing a fresh coat that didn't quite fit yet. One of the nurses gave him a clipboard and pointed him toward radiology. But this time, someone called out. Hey, make sure you meet Dr. Briggs. He's one of the best we've got. The student turned toward me. Smiled wide. And that was the twist no one saw coming. Not the code blue. Not the speech. But the moment someone got to walk in already seen, because I'd walked through first. Sometimes, it takes a crisis for people to see the truth. But real change? It begins long before the applause, long after the mistake. When we stop making assumptions and start asking who are you? Not based on appearances but potential, we take the first step toward justice. We don't need another seminar. We need people who stop pretending they don't see it. If this story made you think, moved you, or reminded you of something you've lived through, don't stay silent. Speak up. Listen better. Be better. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories that reveal truth, challenge assumptions, and echo the voices that matter. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe someone needs to hear this, share it. Change starts with a single voice. Maybe today that voice is yours.